Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars in what's going to be a unique edition. Comes out at the moment and presented to you, as always, by Kilbey Tyres and by our good friends at the Justice Brothers. But presented this week, not with my good friend and pal Marshall Pruett, but by me, Graham Goodwin, and by my partner in crime, Stephen Kilbey. Say hello, Stephen.
Hiya.
Now, there's a good reason for this, as some of you might have noticed from Marshall's social media this past week. Marshall is busy doing other far more important things in motorsport right now, and our best wishes to his good lady for a rapid recovery. There's another reason why this show is going to be a little bit unique, and that's because, as you might gather from the slightly rumbling background soundtrack, we're doing this one on the move. We're aboard the DSC Fun Bus, Daily Sports Car, on our way back from a pre-Le Mans test at Spa. Some news of that in just a moment. But format's going to be much the same. Stephen's going to be serving up as many questions as we can between where we are at the moment in Liège, in Belgium, and the Channel Tunnel on the coast, of course, of France, on our way back to the UK. But before we get into questions, where will we be? Well, we spent a couple of days at the fabulous Spa-Francorchamps circuit, where, in sharp contrast to the just simply dreadful weather we had for the FIA World Endurance Championship, we've had glorious weather today for day 2 of the test that featured the first appearance of Brendan Hartley aboard a Toyota LMP1 hybrid. Featured Michelotto's tyre testing car, having the mother and father of all shunts, reducing itself to more or less its component parts. Happily no damage, though, to Alessandro Greedy, who was aboard that car. We've witnessed a new car that's coming to the Le Mans 24 Hours for the first time with the APM Monaco Porsche. But the reason we've been there is to keep a weather eye on the Ginetta LMP1 programme and its latest development test. We'll have a lengthy interview for Inside the Sports Car Paddock next week with Lawrence Tomlinson about that programme and about the news that broke today as we're recording it, that a 2-car entry has been posted for the Ginetta LMP1 for the next season, 2019-2020, of the FIA World Endurance Championship. So all of that was going on, and plenty on both racer.com and on dailysportscar.com about all of that from both me and from Stephen. But for now, we're going to get stuck into your questions, and with apologies that it's going to be a little bit more single voice, but Stephen's going to serve up these questions rather than me reading them, because since I'm driving the DSC Fun Bus, that would be insane. But Stephen, far away. We're going to kick it off this week with the IMSA questions, so far away.
So the first question we've got comes from John Sable on Facebook. He says, what's the horsepower number that will get manufacturers excited about electrification in DPI 2.0? The 50 horsepower you mentioned previously does sound unimpressive.
It does, and I think that's been certainly the response from at least one major manufacturer considering a DPI Gen 2 programme. Clearly, the IMSA have got a real decision to make. It's a real balancing act between being accused in some way of tokenism, but also retaining the relevance that electrification brings. Absolutely no one understands how divisive this is, particularly to kind of traditional motorsport purists, but the reality of life now is that very many motor manufacturers are going to start to struggle to justify those kinds of projects without some semblance of electrification or a similar kind of technology transfer that coming into those programs. What number would I consider? Well, certainly what we're being told by at least one of those manufacturers is that the number that's being touted right now gives them a problem. So clearly the answer is going to be a larger number than about 50. Should it be as high as we've seen in the LMP1 cars in recent years? And for those that aren't aware, that's certainly well into the hundreds, the multiple hundreds. The answer is pretty clearly, if you're looking to keep the budgets down, no. Is there potential for a happy medium? I think that one's going to come out in the wash remarkably quickly, and it's going to come down to whether or not there was bluff being employed by at least one of those manufacturers in the recent working group meetings, or whether or not they can be won around to IMSA's way of thinking, becomes then a straight choice. Do you go IMSA's way and lose that potential manufacturer, or do you turn up a wick and potentially have an impact on the budgets and on the willingness of other manufacturers to crack on with DPI Gen 2? That could be remarkably difficult question to answer, and it could be a remarkably significant question to be answered depending on how things go, amongst other things with car as we push forward.
The next question comes from Matt Nieder on Facebook.
Nieder.
Oh, Nieder.
Yeah. Think dirty knee.
Apologies. Matt Nieder. The recent announcement by Dragon Speed makes mention that they'll continue with a reduced WC LMP2 programme in 2019-20 and are considering running Daytona and Sebring with IMSA again. While these two races are obviously the crown jewels of the IMSA calendar, Dragon Speed and possibly other global teams who wish to enter would be just 2 more races shy of contesting the Michelin Endurance Cup. Might this be an opportunity for IMSA to try and revive the LMP2 grid by attracting global teams to the Michelin Endurance Cup rounds? I would go as far as to suggest that they could award one of the 2 IMSA allocated auto entries for Le Mans to the LMP2 winner of the Michelin Endurance Cup in an effort to attract global teams.
It's a very good question, Matt, and I'm sure the brains trust at IMSA have thought through those prospects. The key to it is, what is the appeal of those individual races? Pretty clearly what Julian has told us and has told the world now is that they are considering Sebring and Daytona, the Florida double if you like. The key to your idea, and it's not the worst idea I've heard, not by a long chalk, is increasing the attractiveness of certainly Watkins Glen, which sits, of course, pretty close to the Le Mans 24 Hours for any team that's actually considering doing that race. And, of course, it would be another transatlantic trip for that whole squad. This is a team that currently has access to 2 Orica 07 LMP2 cars, one of which they've already told us is being committed to the LMS. Could it be the case that they might commit both? They might in 2020 with the LMS and then contest the additional races. I think it's certainly an idea with some validity, and it's particularly valid bearing in mind the fact that we have seen in recent years a couple of awardees of the IMSA auto entries step away from those entries. In other words, you want to be putting people into a competition where they absolutely know that that's a key part of the appeal. And what we know from the LMP2 teams that are contesting in Europe, and increasingly they're beginning to come forward and commit to potential programs in Asia, is that the opportunity to earn that Le Mans place is a very valuable commodity. So I think it's certainly an idea worthy of consideration. Be interested to see what IMSA think.
The next one comes from Holger Oppelt on Facebook. With an LMP2 class in the WC and ELMS facing only small numbers of Dallara P217 chassis participating in events due to lack of performance, shouldn't IMSA's LMP2 class be more in favour of those runners because of the possibility to equalise capabilities with BOP compared to the Orica 07s? Same applies to Ligier's.
Again, interesting. I don't see very much love in the room for further equalisation of BOP over and above the burden that has already been laid upon them. There are also some restrictions, as I recall, placed upon IMSA about what they can do with the LMP2 base, and in particular if the LMP2 base is going to be used for anybody earning the right to go to the Le Mans 24 Hours. So it's an interesting question. We're not a million miles away from answers to just exactly what's going to happen with those Dallara and Ligier numbers beginning to tail off, as they have done dramatically so actually with the Dallaras in the European Le Mans series. That said, you talk to others and they will tell you, look at what happened, for instance, at the start of the FIWC race, with the possibility of a well-driven Dallara duking it out right at the head of the field, as Guido van der Garde did. Is it a bad car? No. Is it not as good a car as the Orica? I would say that across the stint lengths and the race lengths, that's almost certainly the case. But a well-driven Ligier has shown itself able to actually get onto a podium, as it did at Monza, with a well-driven crew. United Autosports bringing that car to the podium at the end of last season. United Autosports winning 2 of the races. I don't think it's always quite as simple as that's the best car. Remember, there is a radical difference between the quality of the driving squads across the Pro-Am teams in Europe, and I'm sure the same is true in IMSA as well.
We have seen it considered, haven't we, BOP and P2, and we came close to it, I think, towards the end of last year.
We did, and that's been a conversation that we've had with the ACO, and I'm sure the teams have had with the ACO. I sense a reluctance to step into that abyss, to be honest with you. I sense a reluctance to spend terribly much more time worrying about whether or not your customer base has chosen effectively the correct chassis. The inevitability too is there are going to be some circuits that suit one package rather than the other. No doubt in my mind across the board, the Oracle has been proven at the moment to be probably the best choice across the board, but I don't think it's quite as cut and dried as that at every single circuit.
Next one comes from Gimme Clout over on the USCR's Reddit page. It's referring to an article that was posted online talking about the fact that DPI could be a lifeline that the ACO and FIA need to replace their top class in the WEC. He's asking what the take is on it.
DPI as a potential Plan B, the much vaunted Plan B for the WEC. It's an interesting prospect, isn't it? We've got a fair amount of guesswork going on about what Plan B actually is. I can tell you what it isn't. It isn't Class 1. It isn't the DTM Super GT new regulations. It does not appear to be GTE Plus. That programme certainly has its advocates, and rather than kind of grasping at the straw of that for a headline, I'll say as it is. It's certainly GTE Plus as its advocates. They tend to be advocates with, with something in the game to gain by that. The same with DPI. DPI right now absolutely has value potentially as something that might add depth to the Le Mans 24 Hours and maybe to the WEC, but to do so, whether it's Gen 1 or more likely Gen 2, the reality is that you're going to have rather more factories interested and involved in that marketplace than we currently have, because at the moment there simply aren't enough. Neither are there enough immediately in prospect to sustain both a very healthy North American Continental Championship, IMSA, and the potential for any kind of global product, WEC or whatever might come after WEC. So the key, as far as I'm concerned, is could it? Yes, of course it could. As could Hypercar if that comes forward, as could some melding of the current regulations. Will it? It will only become a potential saviour for all of this if the number of manufacturers that are backing that kind of programme, because ultimately it is going to be manufacturer marketing money that makes the difference, only if that number of manufacturers goes rather further north than the relatively small number we've got right now.
I was going to say about GTE Plus, and there being the potential appetite for that type of formula outside of factory teams. And the reason I say this is because I spoke to Christian Reed today, and he was talking
Christian Reed, we should say, from Proton Competition, the preeminent Porsche privateer in European and global racing.
Yeah, Porsche's AF Corsa, if you will.
Effectively.
And he was talking about his experience he had last year getting a chance to drive the Porsche 919 and how incredible it was. But he sort of said, as much as I've looked at prototype racing before, I'm going to have to stick with GTs because it's just unbelievably complex. But he said to me, with the GTE Plus thing, if we had amateurs with, of his ilk coming in with GTE cars with better aero, more power, he'd be well up for that. He genuinely thinks it's something that could work for him.
Well, it's because he's a nutter for the most part. So Christian, massive enthusiast, and has been around in GTE and its predecessor categories for more than 20 years with the family-owned team. It has merit, but then again, very many proposals have got merit. Hypercar, despite its detractors, has got real merit. The thought that you could actually have a premium prototype class that has got visual relevance to manufacturers is something that's been talked about time and time and time again. The problem is, have you got enough of a support base, customer base, manufacturer base to warrant throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And my concern now with when we got to Hypercar is, have we got enough? The same for GT Plus, if that became a thing. The same with DPI Gen 2, is have we got enough with one set of regulations to make a viable difference without impacting what's a really healthy Pro-Am customer base in P2 and GT-Am, for instance. And of course, GTE Pro Plus, if you like, which sounds more and more like some kind of performance supplement you get in the back room of a gym every time I kind of think about it. But the reality of that could be that you then mess with the customer base that you've got with GT-Am, which has been, the ACO would acknowledge, the surprise hit of the WEC in this transition to a winter season.
And you're not just going to be able to wheel out a GTE car with just, a slightly different aero package and low bore power. These cars are going to have to go through proper re-engineering to be able to match this pace, and that's something that I suppose some people might not even think about.
Well, you think about it. If you're adding the kind of level of pace that you are talking about for these cars, I mean, you take a look. Any WEC race at the fastest lap, for instance, fastest race lap of a GTE Pro car, and then the fastest lap you would need to be looking at of the LMP2 class. Before we get into LMP1, look at the difference that would make. That's going to have to be delivered immediately in terms of performance through aero and through power. But then think about the impact that's going to have on cooling. It's going to have particularly on braking, and then on tyre technology. This is not a cheap option. This is not a cheap option. It is not simply a matter of basically, crashing into your local Halfords and coming out with, wings at every corner. This is a massive re-engineering of an albeit existing platform. But then again, that's exactly what DPI effectively would be around an LMP2 platform. And in some cases, there is the argument that there is carryovers for some of the existing chassis technology for LMP1 into hypercar. So very easy to say there's a simple cost-effective solution. There is no cheap way to go premier class racing in any sort of motorsport, and certainly not endurance sport.
Next we've got Smoking Puppy 841.
My favourite, by the way, Twitter handle.
It's a great name.
It is.
If theoretically Riley/Multimatic weren't able to build September 2021 and beyond LMP2 cars, and theoretically both Mazda and Ford wanted to enter DPI 2.0, which constructor do you think they might go and look at?
That's a lot of theories, isn't it? Theoretically, reality is, look, what do we know? I can't see there being a position placed before a valued manufacturer program that in any way is going to impact whatsoever on the choice of that team and the chassis that they're currently employing. I can tell you, and you know this as well because you were part of the same conversation I'm about to talk about here, Stephen, is that those that have experienced that Multimatic chassis are extremely complimentary about its abilities, about its quality. I don't see that going away anytime soon, unless those factory programs go away, in which case the question is negated. The really interesting question here is what happens next, not just with Gen 2 DPI, but with the next iteration of LMP2. Do we retain legacy chassis if those manufacturers decide not to enter the LMP2 market? Do they add more? Do we go further than 4? There's an argument to say that we could add maybe at least a couple more. We know you need to look at other relevant kind of prototype technology, and you look to LMP3 for instance, where we've got Norma, Ligier already in, of course, LMP2 and Ginetta for that matter. So there's lots of unanswered questions at the moment. I just hope that while we're sorting out LMP1 and everything that falls out from that, and Plan A, Plan B, and any points in between, that there's a weather eye as well on what impacts that's going to have a little further down the chain, not the kind of the quality chain, but in terms of the chain of where those key components, the chassis technology in particular, lands. That's the key point now for whatever lies ahead for DPI, whether or not it's as a global formula, which could be the case, or whether or not it's just retaining the level of momentum that undoubtedly IMSA got behind that formula.
I think it's safe to say when we spoke to Ollie Pla about that Master chassis, he was blown away by it, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking in comparison, this was the point at which Ollie was about to become the second ever race driver to campaign in a race, one of each of the four, at least one of each of the four available LMP2 chassis. And Ollie's experience, of course, of the Multimatic chassis came with that in DPI form. And yeah, absolutely, he was effusive in his praise for the Multimatic chassis, and the way in which that product had been developed forward.
And he's a guy, like you say, he's got a lot of experience, not only just racing but developing.
Yes, absolutely. He's worked with Ligier down through the years as de facto factory driver, doing a lot of the development work on, multiple iterations of Ligier LMP2, and I believe LMP3 cars as well. So
LMP1.
Absolutely. So there's lots and lots there to kind of conjure with, but it's a good question.
Next one comes from Stephen Waterston. This is from Twitter. He says, long-time listener, first-time caller.
You're welcome.
Several weeks ago, MP mentioned that the Ford GT was toned down to race in the GT class. If the restrictions were removed, could the Ford GT run with the IMSA DPI class?
Again, I think the honest answer is we don't know. There's no doubt you could do something to any car to bring it up to spec. At what cost? And whether or not you could do that within a regulatory framework that currently exists is another set of questions. Could you, basically soup that thing up, add a little bit of extra aero, not that it's got any kind of shortage of aero? The answer is, of course, you could, but as we were saying a little earlier, it's not just about the speed, it's about everything else that goes with that package, and particularly when you're dealing with, a turbocharged powertrain, as you are with a Ford, cooling has got a massive, massive part to play in that. And of course, when you're putting in the various scoops and rads and everything that's required to cool a car, that again has a massive impact on the ability for the aero that's currently present to do its job.
It's interesting to see what GTE cars can do when they don't have restrictions on. Weren't you present once when you saw a Ferrari GTE car running unrestricted at Bahrain?
Yeah, we've seen that car. We've seen that from a well-known and very wealthy gentleman that has been present in motorsport. Has actually, I believe, 3 such cars where they are unrestricted and lightened, and the ability, so the legend goes, with that car, with this guy, who was a decent gentleman peddler, is that he could match factory driver pace in that car. So factory driver pace in a regular GTE car, he could match that with his effectively unrestricted, lightened and otherwise enhanced GTE car. So the capabilities are there with those things. Whether or not that would survive, an all-in battle around a 6, 12 or 24-hour race is again an entirely different proposition. And at what cost?
And with the Ford, I remember when it was first launched, I remember your reaction when you came back to the press room at the moment when you'd seen it for the first time. You said that thing, it looks like a prototype.
It does look like
a prototype. That would be interesting to see what that thing could do.
But equally, then you have to look back and see where we were with GT2, GTE in earlier iterations, and what we've seen added in there. And this is to a degree part of the regulatory enigma, isn't it? Which is what we've seen is power has gradually been dragged away from those cars, and they've offset the reduction in power that we've seen over the years with an increase in aero. So aero has become far more part of the equation. You look back at something like the Ferrari 430 GT2, that's not that long ago. Look at that compared to the current Ferrari 488 GTE, it's a completely different world. And Ford have basically done what you'd expect Ford and Multimatic and Chip Ganassi Racing and everybody's been involved in the development of that to do, which is to completely use everything that's available to them in the regulatory template. Nothing wrong with that. It's given us an extraordinary looking and extraordinary performing GT car, but does that make it an LMP2 car, which is effectively the next step up we're talking about, or indeed a DPI car? No, it doesn't. And it doesn't for a variety of reasons.
And remember how much development work that the Vantage went through when Aston re-engineered the rear end of that car, didn't they, effectively?
Well, I mean, the Aston Martin Vantage, the older V8 Vantage, you look at just what they were able to do within the template of what even then were fairly restrictive rules. What you saw was things like fuel tank being relocated, completely different roll cage, totally different bodywork that actually looked the same. So you'd actually have to look at detailed differences to see whether or not you were talking about a slightly older version of the old, now, a much loved V8 Vantage, the normally aspirated car, or the newer version of that car. So, we're dealing here with extremely clever people, and the first thing that clever people do is to examine every dot and comma of a set of rules and regulations. The second thing they do is to find where the holes are.
That'll do us for IMSA, so we're going to switch now to WC, Asian Le Mans, ELMS.
Whack, Elms, Acco, as we call it,
yes,
or something.
And we're going to start with Ian Chicken from Facebook. And he says, can you really see anyone buying into the Ginetta LMP1 with the ongoing hypercar fiasco and now that Dragon Speed have quit?
Well, okay, let's go through that. So where are we with the Ginetta programme? Well, as we said at the top of the show, today has seen confirmation from Ginetta that two cars have been entered for the WEC, and that the programme continues now. There's going to be more information, more announcements to come about exactly what that programme, or indeed programmes, looks like. But I've seen a couple of bits and pieces of comments in reaction to both Ginetta's announcement and indeed to Daily Sports Car's coverage of that announcement today, basically saying things like, it's a very internet comment, so basically what you're saying is you're 90% there, all you need is the money. No. Ginetta are going to be racing in the FIWC. Ginetta's cars will be racing in the FIWC. Of that is now confirmed. Utter disaster aside, that is now confirmed. That is the intent of putting in those entries. Exactly what those cars will have in terms of sponsorship, who we're driving them, what the team name is, other aspects of that package. Oh, by the way, with the AER engine. But other aspects of that package, you're going to have to wait and see. But can you right now, if you're putting together your spotter's guide for Silverstone in September, put two Ginetta AERs on that list? The answer is, as of today, yes, you can. The only reason that Ginetta are not saying today we will be there is because they are respecting the reality that the FIWC is a selection event. It's an invitational championship. They have to wait, they have to give courtesy to that process, not say we are going to be there. They are saying we've put an entry in exactly the same way as you would for the Formula One World Championship if you're a new entrant to it, and exactly the same way as you do, we see every year, with the courtesy that's given to the ACO for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Don't read into the nuance of that language that they're unsure. They've entered. Money will have been paid for that entry. And yes, I get it, and I hear the next thing about, but isn't that what happened last time? What happened last time was massively unfortunate, and it came down to an inability to get the required funding to make the previous programme with Ginetta out of China. That's it. It's as simple as that. Guarantees were given, contracts were signed, they were not delivered upon, and we can all point fingers and say we think it was that part of the bargain or that part of the bargain that went wrong. The reality was here that what certainly didn't go wrong, it certainly wasn't down to the Ginetta team at Garforth, whose job, let's face it, is to design, build, and to a degree develop that package. That's where we are now. That's what you and I have just been doing, Stephen, and it was certainly received extremely well by the backroom team, when the announcement was made to them, as a group, by Lawrence Tomlinson, that he could confirm that entries had been filed for those 2 cars. I think it's unremittingly good news for a class that at the moment, frankly, needs the help.
Next up, we've got a question about Glickenhaus. This is from Robert Pielli Jr. He says, in your hashtag me personally personal opinion, what are the chances that the situation develops in such a way that Glickenhaus drops out of the car programme? It would be a shame that the only company who's committed drops out because the rules are catered to OEMs.
I agree completely. I think Jim Glickenhaus and his tiny little team have behaved massively honourably. They've now confirmed their preferred option because, of course, they've had confusion to play with when we've got into the will we go down the road car based effort, will we go down the prototype based effort. They've confirmed that they're effectively going down a prototype based effort with their 007 SEG 007 proposal, so they are committed to it. What they need, what we need, and by the way, I should say that I have seen, because Jim has shared this with me, confirmation from the ACO that they're interested in hypercar, car has been acknowledged, confirmed by the ACO, and they're now engaged in that process. What they need, and we all need, is clarity about where we now stand. I think we are weeks away from getting that. Be assured, if there's good news, we'll be hearing about it in the Le Mans 24 Hours week. I know one of Stephen's favourite things in the whole year with sports car racing, and of course he's got massive highlights with all of that on every single week, he's now grimacing as I say it, is the ACO press conference at Le Mans. One of the most beloved moments for absolutely everybody involved in sports car racing reporting. And by the way, I hope you appreciate the effort it takes to enunciate that so clearly with my tongue wedged firmly in my cheek. It's spectacularly not that welcome to have a lengthy press conference in the middle of, frankly, the busiest period of our working year. But let's wait and see what happens. We're not going to have very long to wait. I think what I can say at this stage is, if there is good news, we'll be hearing it. If there's not good news, we'll be hearing nothing. And if we do hear nothing, that's the point, I think, at which people will start to be worrying a great deal. We'll also add here, by the way, and I'm sure there's further questions about car. There's some very interesting stuff around in terms of opinion about what's happening. Marshall Pruett's piece on Racer that came out of a meeting that happened in the USA with representatives of the ACO in IMSA. Fine piece of investigative journalism that was, and also present to you, our listeners, if you haven't read it, the excellent piece put forward by Andrew Cotton at Racecar Engineering on their website. Don't agree with absolutely everything he says in that, but I think it's a piece of analysis of an emerging and unclear situation. I think Andrew's done a great job of actually outlining the issues there, and I'd urge you to read that. By all means, come back to us. It may very well be that we ask Andrew to come on and answer a few questions as well.
The problem with those of us writing about it is that it almost seems like every time we have a conversation with somebody senior or somebody involved,
it contradicts the previous one.
Yeah, it feels like we have a different opinion every day.
We've come a number of times close to writing good news and bad news stories, only to do what you should do as a responsible journalist and check your sources and go and clarify that position with perhaps an additional source. And on more or less every single occasion, you'll find somebody in a position of influence, somebody in a position where they should have that knowledge, where they will then directly contradict, without being told exactly what the story is sometimes, directly contradict something that's been reported to as a certainty. What that shows is there is genuine confusion. There is genuine debate in some ways about what the chosen way forward is going to be. Should we be saying it's chaos? No. But if you're going to avoid accusations of chaos, the reality is at some point you need to communicate the opposite. And I know that's been difficult for the ACO, but we are getting to the stage where to sort this out for everybody outside those direct discussions, And it is important that other audiences have confidence in that vision moving forward, that something now needs to be said and something now needs to be laid out as being the chosen pathway forward. Because as we've said before, I've certainly said before, that clock is ticking very loudly now towards the point where we've either got to have a solution in place for 2020, 2021, or there's got to be a plan B, or a delay, or both.
And no matter what your opinions are on it, you can't forget just how much of a plate spinning act this is, and how difficult it is to make a decision.
It's massively difficult because we've had conversations even this week where and I really do mean this. Don't underestimate my seriousness here. This could be the last chance to get this right before we get into a whole different era of technology in motorsport. We're not very far away from that, and it might be this is the penultimate, anti-penultimate, whichever iteration, but it's getting more difficult. We've seen today confirmation that BMW is stepping away from their WEC program for all sorts of reasons. Part of that, as we heard from Jens Market when we talked to him at Sebring, was to do with the way in which they could activate their products and their messaging at the WEC events. I sort of accept that. I would go and present an opposite point of view as well, which is I'd like to see more attempt from BMW to do that. Actually, the emphasis here cannot just be on one side of the debate. The manufacturers have got to step up too and make something of those events, as we do see at IMSA, as we do see in other events around the globe with other sanctioning bodies. Only they know, because they're in those meetings, only they know what proposals have been put forward that perhaps haven't been acted upon. And very sad to see the BMW effort going away from the WEC. I'd have been sadder still, frankly, if the effort had been more impressive.
Well, a couple more questions about Glickenhaus. This one's about Glickenhaus and Bicolis. James Stewart asks on Twitter, I guess judging by Bicolis and Glickenhaus having images posted of hypercar concept, Bicolis being a drawing of the rear end, whilst Glickenhaus confirming involvement still, is that prototype car has perhaps been passed. Is that it, or is it political, so there's pressure?
I think it's all of it. I mean, if you were there putting your investment in, which clearly Jim Glickenhaus has, and so has Colin Collis, frankly, even if all you're doing is commissioning somebody to come up with an artist sketch, and we know that Bicolis certainly have been advertising months ago for people like hybrid drivetrain engineers, they're putting effort into that process. Of course, they're then invested in that process. So they're invested in trying to make this work as best they possibly can. The fact that their program might be less in monetary terms than, let's say, I don't know, Aston Martin or Toyota, doesn't matter. As a proportion of their available resource, it's huge. So clearly they want to defend their position, because let's put it this way, what we absolutely know is that Glickenhaus, neither Glickenhaus nor Bicolis has either a GTE Pro Plus possibility, or indeed a DPI Gen 2 possibility. We know those have not been in their orbit, so why wouldn't they defend that with whatever tools they've got at their disposal? Will that be telling in the final analysis? I don't think it will. I think it gives a little bit of kind of shine on the body armour for hypercar if there are programs waiting to come in the background. And those conversations that Stephen and I have just been talking about have been varied from they've only got one to there's definitely another one that's very close to what's actually holding this up is that two other manufacturers are holding a lot of cards, and that's preventing people from making a decision, which, by the way, for those only as good as I am at maths, means potentially 4. Do I believe all 4 today? No. Do I believe all 4 at the start of Hypercar? No. Do I believe they've got the prospects of more than one early? Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the key is how close they are, and if you're very close to having 2 to 3 to 4 manufacturers, trying to push it over the line is surely the more favourable thing for them to do rather than start again.
But I agree with that, and I think the other thing is this too. It's all you can do when you are the ACO, the WEC, the FIA, that collegiate body, if you like, is to present a set of rules. You've then got to, albeit with encouragement and through negotiation and try to make these things easier, you've effectively then got to wait and see whether the people that have actually engaged with you in what, make no mistake, are lengthy discussions, meetings, email exchanges, conversations, you name it. I'm sure the odd lunch as well. Whether or not they finally can bring a programme together with the support of sometimes questioning board level process at a point in time when that has become immeasurably more difficult than it ever has been before. I absolutely do not underestimate how difficult this process is. I completely understand why it is that, if you like, those cards have been played close to the chest. My view is we are now getting to the point where, and they know it, they absolutely know it, we're getting now close to the point where credibility is on the line. And at some point you've got to say something. And boy oh boy, in a world as judgmental as it now is in immediate terms, you've got to say the right thing, not the wrong thing. Think I'm wrong? Look at the individual utterances that very many people define a particular programme. Okay? I'll give you, for instance, very many of the initial criticisms of Nissan's GTRLM programme were defined by an individual sentence spoken by Andy Palmer at the launch about his aspirations for that programme. There's a fantastic Twitter stream at the moment. I'm using the wrong word, but I'm driving at 80 miles around a French motorway. It's hard to make the odd wrong word. Which was started by Ricardo de Villa, looking to effectively inform and educate about the reality of that GTRLM programme. And some extraordinary stuff has come out in that conversation. Do take a look, including the revelation from Mulsanne Mike Fuller, the patron of the fantastic Mulsanne Mike's website, which is a real repository for brilliance and some excellent archive stuff to do with the genesis of the development of generations of sports prototypes. That Mike, one of the things that got Mike to actually step away from regular updates from Mulsanne's Corner was the response of what I think you kids call the haters around that programme, and that he just couldn't continue to try to defend the principle of innovation, whether it fails or whether or not it succeeds, under the pressure exerted by just constant, repeated negativity. I think, when we look at other aspects of modern life, I'm looking at you politics right now, something we need to take a good hard look at each other and say, should we be just questioning our thoughts, our actions, our feelings about the way in which those kinds of matters are commented on with such vigour, at times such bile? It's important that we actually give people space to think, space to innovate, and I would say this, space to fail, and that failure once doesn't mean you don't get the chance to push again. That's where things have changed. That's why now it's so important that they make a decision that they can stick with and that will be sustainable for an extended period of time.
Here's one for you, Graham. So with your background, with your work that you've done in negotiations on a governmental level, okay, you're the FIA and ACO in this.
Oh, please don't say that.
Okay, but in this instance you are. How? Because people have accused them effectively of going weeks and months without communicating properly.
Yep.
Behind the scenes, how desperate are these guys to be able to just turn around and go, do you know what, this is what's actually happening?
I'll tell you right now, there is not going to be a single senior member of any of those bodies involved that isn't more eager than you, I, or anybody listening to this show to come out and say, this is what we've got. And the only reason, or the only reasons they won't be doing that is, one, they haven't got anything or they haven't got enough to be credible doing it, or 2, that they believe that by hanging on in there and continuing that negotiation, that they will have more and better. They're the only 2 reasons. They're not doing it, frankly, to piss you off. They're not doing that to make your life worse. They're doing it because they're trying to succeed. And they do need to be given space, but they do know, and I have had these conversations, they do know that the time is now coming very close where they do need to make it clear where the difficulties are with those negotiations, where we are. We're not entitled to know every dot and comma of these kind of negotiations. That's not our role. Whether or not that's us as a journalist, as a fan, that's not for us. And we're not entitled to that. The immediacy of communication nowadays sort of gets you to the point where people feel that that's the case. However, common sense is something different to that. Common sense says that if you're going to bring a body of support and opinion with you, you need to communicate better. And I think there are some lessons there for the bodies concerned about what it is they can say and to be given space to do that.
Now we've got James Counter on Facebook. This is another one from Glickenhaus. He says, with Glickenhaus looking to put more programmes on track in the medium-term future, how likely are they to expand their current setup to accommodate it?
Well, they already are. They've Jim and the company have developing a new manufacturing base based on what in fact was the old Highcroft Racing site in Danbury, I think. So they're looking to actually build all their cars in the US, although their race engineering side of things will still be with Podium Engineering in Italy. But Jim is very proud of where he wants to be with the new range of products for Glickenhaus, where he wants them to be built in America. He wants the car that's going to be a GT3 car to be built in America. He wants the car that's going to be a GT4 car, this road car equivalent, to be built in the US. And that's very laudable indeed. He's a very proud man. He's got real ambition around that. And again, I'd say this about Glickenhaus. He's done some fantastic stuff. You were there, Stephen, at the Nürburgring when they set pole position with that 003. What I was looking at right there was Jim Glickenhaus picked up the trophy, which, by the way, bears his name because he donated it. That was a very proud man.
Oh, yeah. And he's bonkers, but in the best possible way.
Oh, yeah.
And we're running out of that level of bonkers in sports car racing.
We're running out of that level of bonkers in life. And I think, again, ask yourself this out there, dear listeners. What would you rather have? Would you rather have a sport that is wholly beholden to the kind of process that we've been talking about around car now, OEM based, etc., etc., or would you like a bit of bonkers? Would you like to actually have something that gave somebody with the opportunity and the resource to do something at that kind of level as a private individual? There's another example. We've talked about that too. Stand Up and Be Counted, Lawrence Tomlinson and Ginetta. Without people like Jim Glickenhaus, Lawrence Tomlinson, and there are lots of other examples of that, how much duller would our lives be in our sport? How much duller would they have been over the decades, over the years? The reality of it is, it would have been immeasurably less interesting, immeasurably less fun to observe what's coming. Not every one of those projects will succeed. Not every one of those projects is going to be a world beater. Some of them have been stand down, hilarious. You'll be aware that we talk about the Cannibal a lot on the Week in Sports Cars. And the reason for that is we love the fact that they tried. They went to go racing on a budget. They tried. They were there. They were out, every other weekend, however long the Cannibal was actually out there. There's a bunch of private guys trying to do something a little bit different. Was it ever going to win the really big races? Well, not unless a meteorite struck the rest of the field. But am I pleased they tried? Absolutely 100%. I saw that car run at speed for the first time at the Le Mans Classic last year, and it put a massive smile on my face. That's what I want from my sport. I want to feel joyful about it.
Next we've got Smoking Puppy 841 again. He says, is there any particular reason why Fred Makovicky has been dropped from Porsche's full-time GTE GTLM lineup for the past couple of years? It's a shame to see an incredibly quick driver not racing in the WC or IMSA week in, week out.
The honest answer is I don't know is the answer to that. I've not seen Fred for a little while. I will tell you this, that factory programmes and factory drivers live or die based on a pure analysis of their performance. That is something that is it's an analytical process that goes on all the time. Let's not presume that that's the case necessarily here for Fred. We don't know what's going on in the background at Porsche. We don't know whether or not they've got one of their real hot shoes involved in development of something we don't know about yet. We don't know. But he is still very much part of the Porsche family. He's still remarkably quick. He's got a smile that would stun a horse from about 50 paces, and I hope very much that he's going to continue to be part of that family for many years to come. He, though, as all factory drivers, will be fully well aware that there is, as always, a list of worthies coming up on the rails, and Porsche is absolutely no different to that. Look at the guys we've got coming through now: Matteo Caroli, we've got Julian Andlauer, we've got Thomas Preining. These are all extremely quick guys, and it keeps the current guys very much on their toes.
It's a logjam.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we do have a couple of, how can we put this, slightly more senior in terms of years and experience Porsche factory drivers, but that's not to say that there isn't a role there for them. Look at guys like Jörg Bergmeister, look at guys like Patrick Long, who are probably, definitely closer to the end of their careers than the beginning, but they're now being utilised by Porsche in a very different way. They're now being utilised to add real fire in the belly to some of their favourite Pro-Am programs, partner programs, teams like Project One with Proton Competition and their valued customers, and those kind of things are just as valid. I expect to see Fred Makovicky behind the wheel of a sports car going remarkably quickly for many years to come.
Next one's from Luke Filippone on Facebook. He says, "Hi gents, if Toyota doesn't continue with whatever LMP1 becomes, what are the chances of them entering GTE with their new Z4 Supra?"
Right, easy one. No way they'll be in GTE with a Supra. Not remotely close to being a package that's going to be capable of being developed to that degree in any meaningful way. The future for that car in GT racing is it's a GT4 platform, without a shadow of a doubt. Might we see something more extreme as things move forward? Possibly. Let's wait and see. But the reality for Toyota is going to be this. The TS050 will race next season, two-car team. We know that already. We saw Brendan Hartley today prepping for his role in replacing Fernando Alonso at the wheel of one of the two factory cars. We also know, because Toyota have told us, that will be the final season for the Toyota TS050. Beyond that, everything relies on what happens with hypercar, with car. Everything relies on that. If that doesn't happen, for whatever reason, then I think you're in a position where you have a strong likelihood that you lose Toyota to international sports car racing at the highest prototype level. Am I saying that that's going to happen? 100% no, I'm not, because I don't know. And I'm not going to play the game of guessing, and I'm not going to throw things at the internet that are overpopulated by the words could, for instance. That's not going to happen. The reality here is they're waiting, we're waiting. What I'm sensing, we've certainly found at the Spa WC round, where there was some carefully scripted anger being transmitted from the Toyota Gazoo Racing camp. And if you want to hear that directly, play the Inside the Sports Car Paddock that featured interview with Toyota Gazoo Racing's team principal, and you'll hear it directly. That was coming from lots of sources at Toyota. It was clearly intended that impression would come across, and that means they're keen to exercise influence on the timing and the outcome of that process.
And they've been really clear about their position on it.
Very clear. We could come up with all sorts of conspiracy theories or whatever else it is. The reality is this: Toyota have been through a lengthy period of time, number one, were saviours of the WEC when Peugeot pulled out at the last moment. The WEC would not have happened without Toyota coming a year early, if you like, with their then very new car. Number two is they've continued to invest in that platform ever since. Number three, they are still investing in that platform, again, out testing ahead of Le Mans and making the commitment to bringing that factory program for another full WC season. That investment, though, they've decided that they need to think about what comes next in terms of a movement more towards the marketing side of things from the R&D. They're hanging on in there and waiting for what comes next in technology. They, however, now need to actually have some surety about what comes next for Toyota Gazoo Racing, for the corporate body, and they're waiting with a degree less patience than even I am, and I'm not very patient.
It's amazing, isn't it, just how things have changed in the space of 48 months.
Staggering
for Toyota, because we've gone from them being the plucky underdog team that people were desperate to keep coming back every year because they wanted them to try and keep fighting on to win, to now people going, I hope they quit.
Well, I tell you what, anybody that says I hope Toyota quits, sorry, but you need to take a good hard look at yourself and think about what that actually means. This is a major global company investing in a sport that, if you're listening to this podcast, you love. And it's not their fault that nobody can step up to the plate. It's not their fault that others made corporate errors that got them leaving this sport, or this part of the sport. Do I think the ones who've left, by the way, are gone forever? Of course I don't. I think they'll be back at a point at which it's advantageous to them in commercial and in technological terms. But I'm not in a hurry to lose Toyota. You and I, Stephen, stood in wonder. I seldom get to watch hybrid race cars at close quarters because I'm usually sitting in a press room or a broadcast booth. But we stood in wonder every time that thing fired up, glided away under electric power and fired up after 40-50 metres. Those things are astonishing vehicles, astonishing race cars with astonishing capability that I strongly suspect we won't see again in my lifetime. I think we'll see other amazing things, but those are amazing pieces of kit. I don't wish them dead. I just don't. But they are beginning to be from a different time. Something else is now required. And my view, I think as a right-thinking guy about these kind of matters, is that they've invested enough in the WEC to at least be given confidence, either that this is going to turn in their direction and they'll be in the mix, gifted wins, but in the mix to be competitive moving forward, or alternatively, that they're no longer required on voyage and given plenty of opportunity to make that decision for themselves.
Next up, we've got Jacob Baim, I think, from Facebook.
I'm going to leave you to. It's normally my job to mangle the names, so you're going to suffer this time.
Apologies, I've probably butchered that. With Leo Roussel suffering injuries in his ELMS crash at Monza, what are the chances he'll be healthy enough to participate in the Le Mans 24 Hours of Inter Europol?
Yeah, sadly, I think very, very limited indeed. And Leo, if you are listening, of course we wish you well. I wish that weren't the case, but I'm told minor fracture of a vertebra for Leo in that big shunt for the Inter Europol Ligier at Monza. Leo's name was missing from the provisional list. It was 185, not 186 drivers on the provisional list for Le Mans, released by the ACO immediately after the Monza meeting, and Inter Europol now moving forward in another direction. So sadly we are not going to see Leo Roussel back at Le Mans. I hope we see Leo back in the ELMS Goodwin soon. Very talented young man, of course, European Le Mans Series champion from just a couple of years ago, and it was great to see him back in the seat of an LMP car in what has been so far a spectacular European Le Mans Series. Young man, if you're listening, get well soon and come back to us.
We should probably send the same wishes to Mark Patterson as well, another man who will miss out on Le Mans.
He will, and but I know Mark is he's a plucky old dog. He really is. Nasty injury to suffer. He is fit as a butcher's dog's personal trainer, and I've no doubt whatsoever that if that injury can heal in good order, that Mark, for a man of 89 years old now, Mark Patterson,
it's 90, isn't it?
No, that's next year. No, 90. Was it 89 or was he born in 1889? I can never remember. But Mark, I hope we'll be on course to break the record that I know he's had his eyes on for a while, and that would be to contest the 2020 Le Mans 24 Hours, when he would become the oldest ever participant in the great race, edging out Jack Kirkin, Gerber. Jack Kirkin, of course, is anybody in IMSA will know Jack Kirkin is. I do apologise, Jack, but Jack Gerber from just a few years ago. So hopefully Mark Patterson can do it. Beloved member of the sports car paddock. Real sadness that he was hurt at all. In particular sadness that being hurt meant that he missed the race at Monza, and they will now miss the race at the Le Mans 24 Hours.
Another one from Jacob, and I like this one. He says, what do you think will be the future sports car racing fans' generation's perception of Fernando Alonso's WEC career and his results? Will they perceive it as an occasional exercise of single-seater driver to get more acclaim than he already has? Or will it mark the start of a new era where drivers' prowess behind the wheel is no longer defined by his adventures in one particular series of his car?
Great.
So I did this at my dissertation almost, didn't I?
Did you? Yeah, God, you might want to answer the question in a moment. I'll give my first answer, which is history will tell. My view is I'm delighted we've got him. I think it's got a lot more people looking at sports car racing, and not just the WEC, of course, his adventures and successes at Daytona as well. I guess if you're looking for an example of how it might be viewed, well, okay, it's slightly different in that it was a one-off, but look at Nico Hulkenberg. I think that encouraged the likes of Fernando to come, coming along and taking the win at the Le Mans 24 Hours. A race, let's face it, that very many racing drivers would love to win at some point in their career. Some of them would like to do it rather later. There's nothing wrong with that if they've got focus on their single-seater careers. But I think what it did do, it's rather ironic, really, looking back now after the dramas that Marshall Pruett's been writing about over the last week or so in IndyCar. That's actually what happened with. I know we've got a question later on about Zach, with Zach Brown and Fernando Alonso's initial adventures into IndyCar. What then came forward with the sports car programme, Fernando. I hope we see a lot more of it. I think we are going to see a lot more of it. I hope we see drivers that are either currently ensconced in one part of the sport or perhaps taking a bit of a sabbatical, trying something a little different and seeing whether or not they enjoy that. It's a joy to me to see the smile on the face of Jenson Button, a man who had a very worthy career indeed, World Championship winning career, of course, in Formula One, but now is having the time of his life in Super GT, off-road racing. He'll be doing the Baja race later this year. His LMP1 programme didn't perhaps put the same smile on his face, but you know what? He was always a pleasure to talk to while he was with us. And great, by the way, to see back today. Seen him for the first time since that announcement. Brendan Hart. It was nice to spend a few moments having a chat with Brendan and thoroughly enjoying being back in the WC family and the sports car racing family. So yeah, I don't know what the way in which it will be viewed. History's a funny thing. History tends not to be informed by what we think in the moment, but by the way that things sit in the overall scheme of things. The reality is that right now the history books say Fernando Alonso is a Le Mans 24 Hours winner, and my guess, and it is a guess, is that 10 years from now that's all most people will care about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar conversation in some ways to some of the stuff that we talked about on the way here about the 1999 Le Mans 24 Hours, albeit Group C, where when you talk to people, they will say that
Group
was the
C? 99?
No, but I was saying that as well.
Yeah.
When you've got people talking about the fact like the Porsche 956 and that era was absolutely unbelievable and it's much better than now, and then when you look at when you look back in the history books at what we had, it was pretty samey. I mean, the reality was, don't make no mistake, I'm misty-eyed about Group C, and then we get to the reason 99 came up. We should explain is that is a moment that defined, a very high water level in terms of the number and quality of the manufacturer-backed teams at the very top of sports car racing. The reality of that 1999 race was it was a catalogue of disaster for most of those factory teams. Mercedes
principal amongst them, but by no means the only ones. There were, equal travails for Toyota, for Nissan, BMW hardly had a good race the year before in '98 with their then new car. So just having those teams there, just having those drivers there, doesn't necessarily make it a better race. We're in a different world now with a global sports car racing product like the WEC, which simply needs those manufacturer-backed products, programs, to sustain what you require in terms of the media reach and with the logistics to sustain a major global program. And to a lesser or greater extent, those same challenges are there, turned down a little because you're dealing with one principal large market with IMSA and the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship.
With going back to the Fernando Alonso point and what it's done with F1 drivers, I was talking to, I think it was Chris Medland from Racer about...
You don't want to talk to Chris Medland at Racer.
Well, but sometimes we have
someone's got to.
Well, what else are you going to do at Rolex 24 at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Not talk to Chris Medland.
Well, yeah, that's true. And I was sort of asking him the question about how the F1 paddock perceives sports car racing now and how that's changed. And he said to me that we've got to the point now where Formula 1 drivers are dashing up into the press room to follow the Le Mans 24 hours after races. And I think there was a time when they wouldn't have cared.
No,
they genuinely wouldn't have cared.
And I think, part of that is because your mates have been there, and your mates are there. So you've got, the likes of Nico Hülkenberg, the likes of Jenson Button, the likes of Fernando Alonso. And of course, when you've got drivers of that quality, and with the kind of network that they've got in that paddock, then of course that does have an impact. I think it's a universally good thing. We're all of us, when we've got the level of interest that you've got, I've got in this part of this sport, we all live in a bubble. We talk about the F1 bubble, there most certainly is a sports car racing bubble. There's an argument that there's a WEC bubble or an IMSA bubble, or even I'm sure there's a British GT bubble, or a GT4 European Series bubble, or I don't know, whatever you might want to call it, an SRO America bubble, or that's probably just one journalist. But the reality is that what you've got at the end of that rainbow is that you can engage people if there's something of quality to engage them. And when you're out there and the racing is as good as it has been, it's not a surprise to me that you can actually engage with an audience better. You just have to do a better job. And if you're lucky, if someone's taken that risk to come and play, let's face it, a Formula 1 driver, an existing Formula 1 driver, has got more to lose than to gain in terms of reputation by putting themselves their head on the block and trying something different. I think it's a wonderful thing. I hope we continue to do more of this one, because I think one of the things that was wrong, particularly towards the end of Bernie Ecclestone's reign in Formula 1, is it was ludicrously templated, it was ludicrously restrictive, and there was active discouragement from people trying that, from putting any kind of that reach, any kind of that collateral anywhere other than where it paid, the teams in Formula 1 and Bernie's people. That era needed to die, and I hope it's now dead.
And specifically talking about Alonso, I genuinely don't think he sat back and waited for the WC grid and P1 to be what it was now to come and
no.
I think he quietly he'll think it's a massive shame that he's not racing against 12 factory teams that are on a similar level.
No, you want to see Fernando Alonso, in his purest form. Don't look at the WEC right now, because it's an easy thing to criticise. Look at what happened with the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona.
Unbelievable.
He took that race by its dangly bits and gave it a damn good tug. And the reality there is that he was the standout star of that race. Make no mistake whatsoever. Enough, Fernando. Let's move on and do something more.
This next one actually refers to that thread you were talking about the Nissan GTR Nismo. This is from Stephen Gate. He says, hopefully you've seen the fabulous thread over the last 5 days about the GTR.
Odd enough. Yes, I have.
Yes, you have. It's enlightening regarding the car's potential and the reasons for its shortcomings. With a working ERS, do you think it had the potential to win?
In 2015, no, I don't. would I have been very interested to see the potential of that car? Absolutely, of course I would. I still think it was an awesome idea. I'm no aerodynamicist, I'm no mechanical engineer, but I'm perfectly capable of reading words from people who are, and there's enough out there to say that actually that was quite interesting. That part of the concept was interesting. That part of the concept was interesting. Was the final way in which it was put together, a guarantee? Well, of course it wasn't. But, we've been through this before. They didn't really have a choice. If Nissan were going to come, they had to come with something that was pretty radical, because, let's face it, if with a lower budget they tried to go head-to-head with the juggernaut, there was 3 other manufacturers that were already there, with the development in hybrid technology they'd had to that point, the reality was they were going to get their arses handed to them. They chose to go a different way. It didn't work. There are questions to be asked about the way in which some of that programme was managed and delivered, but the reality was, they gave it a whirl. And again, I'll say again, I think people need to be given room to fail, and they need to be congratulated for actually, not for failure, but for actually trying innovation. It is interesting when you talk to people behind the scenes, off the record, about what they felt about that programme. Certain key themes come up. Some of them are directed at the concept or the delivery or the personalities or the balance between the engineering prowess and the marketing potential of it. And I've been on the record 1,001 times about where I am on that one. I think an awful lot of culturologists talked about that side of things. But one thing that is interesting with this is some very well-established and successful people have said to me that there were aspects of that programme, of that concept, that actually were very interesting and have validity. The more you get to the stage where you move away from an internet hater and into people who actually do a proper analysis of this, I've not read a single one, not one, proper analysis of that programme that didn't have something positive to say about some aspects of that programme. That there were things about that programme that had validity, had potential. Were they ever going to deliver on that, with or without the hybrid system? We will now never know. And that is a real shame.
It's a massive shame. It's a massive shame we effectively didn't see that car get a fair shot.
Indeed.
And I've spoken to our good friend Darren Cox about this a couple of times since the dust has settled on it all. Sometimes in a bit of depth about it, because it really genuinely interested me, that programme. And his sort of mindset is that it's really sad for him, because there was a time when that car was out testing, a Bowling Green I think it was, where the stopwatch wasn't lying. They were in with a shot lap time wise.
When it worked, and I think that's the point. I think on that front we've been over and over and over it, and I've been over and over and over it with Darren and with others. For me, it's a wider principle. It's not about the Nissan GT-R LM. It's about a change in the attitude of industry, society, media, public, everything, which is you fail, you're pilloried. You're not in any way given the space, the value that's trying something, finding out that doesn't work quite well enough or at all, being given the opportunity to try again. That part of life appears to have moved away from being part of the conversation, part of the regularity of the way in which you develop a concept. We're now, success or failure is judged immediately in an incredibly personal fashion. I'm just not very comfortable with that. Congratulations, by the way, to Ricardo De Via for taking the veil off that one and starting that conversation. It's incredibly interesting. I do honestly urge you to go and take a look at it and make your own mind up. Make your own mind up whether or not that's a conversation worth having and continuing.
It's a similar situation with BMW with their MTech program that they've, that's just been announced isn't going to be in the WC. And when I spoke to the head of that program today, he's of the mind, and it's similar with Nissan, is that extra year would have made a big difference.
The year of development, year of competition will always make a difference. The problem there is, of course, that what you've had is the big corporate body has decided we're not going to fund it anymore. That's it. We're done. Continue to fund it in IMSA, which is going to be a marketing-based decision without a shadow of a doubt. They've decided not to fund it, and unfortunately, in MTech, you've got a very viable race team that does not have the resources to continue to field and fund those cars going forward. It's a shame.
Now we're heading on to the general section, the fun bit. So we're going to start.
What do you mean the last bit hasn't been fun? What are you saying, Stephen? Are you saying our listeners are dull?
I'm not saying listeners are dull. They've been great, actually. Good questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. It's a shaky.
Is that shovel over there? Can you pass me the shovel?
It's a shaky attitude for a first appearance on the Weekend Sports Cars. We'll cracking on with general.
First one comes from George Buda from Facebook. He says, with the Audi R8 GT3 and the Lamborghini Huracan sharing the same engine, and because of the fact that Audi and Lamborghini belong to the same company, what are the similarities between these cars and the other parts? How much sharing is there?
Well, it's the powertrain. So if you look inside, for instance, a Lamborghini Super Trofeo car, amongst others, you will see on very many of them a badge that says built by Audi Sport. And so the powertrain for the Huracan and the Audi are basically identical. The reality beyond that is devil's in the detail. The way in which that performance is delivered, the aerodynamics of the car, obviously the complete bodywork of the car, and the rest of it is basically down to Lamborghini Squadra Corsa in the case of the Huracan, Audi Sport Custom Racing in the case of the Audi. And make no mistake, they are rivals, and they are vying for the available customer base in every single marketplace. And I'm sure there's a fair amount of how to put this, healthy competition with lots of high fives and donuts around the office when one customer goes one way rather than the other. But very different in terms of the way in which those cars perform out on track, because they have different performance characteristics because of the major differences with the package. But the one major part of those cars, which is effectively identical, is the powertrain.
Next question is so difficult to answer that we've got family members, clearly, of the person involved in this question asking you about it. Carl Brown asks, how hot is Zak Brown's seat in McLaren?
How hot? For a horrible money, I thought you were going to ask me, Carl, how hot is Zak Brown? The answer is not that hot.
It's not for you to answer.
No, it's not for me to answer. I think Mrs. Brown will answer about that. Right, Zak. Okay, well, we've just come through a question where, we've again said the thing that the Zak and Fernando Alonso to IndyCar first time around. Maybe not the last time around. First time around was, I thought, a very good move. It's a really good question. He needs to see success somewhere quickly. Very quickly indeed, in fact. Are we seeing signs of life in the McLaren Formula One programme? Yeah, we are beginning to see that beginning to turn around, but God, it needed to, because I'm afraid the McLaren Formula One programme, through it seems odd to call such a short period of time an era, but through the latest McLaren Honda times, didn't exactly shine a particularly fetching light on much at working. Lots of fingers were pointed, and then there wasn't a great deal of evidence once those aspects of the programme were changed to show that they were pointed in the right direction. In particular lately, with the way in which the current IndyCar, or what was the current IndyCar programme was conducted, well, we've seen a couple of instances of reporting there which shone a bit of a light on there, and whether or not that was Zak pointing the finger correctly or Zak deflecting is not for me to judge, because that's not a press room nor a paddock that I'm directly involved in. As for where we are in terms of the potential for hypercar and a Le Mans programme, I'd like to hear what Zak wants to do, and I'd like to hear when Zak wants to do it, and I'd like to hear only that at this point. What I'd actually like to hear today is McLaren are coming in insert name of season. McLaren are coming with insert solution as to whether or not that is a hypercar, a GTE Plus, or a DPI Gen 2, delete as applicable. Beyond that, I'm bored of the politics. it's very difficult not to get involved in the politics when you've got fingers in all sorts of different pies. But I think Zach now should be thinking hard about the way in which he and the brand, which he is very much the key person behind, is being viewed in the wider world. He's an extremely able guy. What we don't want is that we confuse at this moment his willingness to comment, and he's very willing to comment and to engage, being confused with an ability to deliver a programme. What's needed right now from McLaren is a decision on whether or not programmes are going to be delivered or not. And clarity on that, I think, is long overdue.
Bonnie Lass 47.
Hey, Bonnie Lass, how are you?
From USCR Reddit. Why does the Twisk logo use number 19 on the car?
It's because it's nothing to do with the fact that it's the 2019 season, or not, you decide. It's the fact that that if you actually add the combined waist measurements of both Marshall and I, it's the reverse of that. It's 91 inches.
Next up, we've got Joshua Barrett.
Hey, Josh.
With all the updates at Donington thanks to MSV, might we see sports car return, like ELMS?
Good question. ELMS unlikely, while we still have WEC and ELMS together, because Silverstone is the defined home for that for the foreseeable future as far as I can see. I'd love to see sports cars back at Donington. I think they race very well there. Might we see the possibility that might happen for, let's say for the sake of arguing, Blancpain? No reason at all why not. It's a popular venue for British GT. That is an SRO run event. There are some logistical reasons why Silverstone, why Brands Hatch in particular is a more favoured option. It's clearly a lot closer to mainland Europe than Donington Park, and it's a high quality venue itself. And of course, now being under the same ownership, there's little to be chosen between the two from MSV's point of view. I hope we do. I can't quite see at this moment where that might come from, is the honest answer, Josh. I love Donington Park. It's always been a kind of happy hunting ground for me in terms of the racing I go to enjoy, the racing I go to cover. I don't see ELMS being back there anytime soon, whilst we still have the WC as we know it, because I think that's double header. Excuse me while I go through some Belgian potholes at remarkable speed in the DSC Fun Bus. I don't see that happening anytime soon, unless there's a change in the way that the WEC or whatever succeeds that in the whatever we might foresee future being defined.
This is from James Buffet.
Buffet?
Or Beefer? Beffer? I apologise.
How are we spelling that?
B-E-T-H-A.
Okay, we'll go with Betha. Hey, James.
What's the reason?
Mangling your name at, what is this, 80 miles an hour in Belgium. Here you go.
What is the reason for some teams using fluorescent colours on some of the spokes on the wheels? Is it for aesthetics, or to keep track of wheel position in front of the back side to side, or for some other reason?
I think it's so they can know where the valve is on the wheel. I think that's what it is. It's tyre pressures. I'm pretty certain that's what most of them do. Well, it does look cool, so it could be that as well.
Johnny Schultz at Johnny Trots on Twitter says, is there any chance for the Nürburgring 24 Hours becoming part of the IGTC?
I think the chances are very limited. The IGTC, by definition, Stefan Rattel wants there to be a race on each continent. I know he's targeting South America next. Antarctica can only be a couple of years away. So the reality is we've got the Spa 24 Hours. That is very much the blue ribbon event for the IGTC, although Australia will be complaining bitterly that it should be the Bathurst 12-hour there. But the reality is we've got the Spa 24 Hours. No, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think the Nürburgring 24 Hours operates just fine as effectively a standalone event, albeit it's got the kind of the covering fire of VLN and the ADAC qualification race, which we saw just last weekend. But no, I don't see that being part of the IGTC for that reason alone. It's certainly an event of high quality, but the Spa 24 Hours, unless something goes wrong between SRO and the Royal Automobile Club in Belgium, which doesn't look likely, I think is imperious there. Impervious rather there.
Crushingly disappointing 97 cars at the N24 qualifying race.
Crushing, only 97?
Only 97.
That is appalling.
James Counter on Facebook says, what's the coldest you've ever been whilst doing your job? And I think I know the tale you're going to tell about this. Is this Dubai? 24 hours?
Oh my God! No, you've reminded me of that. Well, actually, that was pretty darn cold. That'd been very cold indeed. Snetterton, damn you. I've been very cold indeed at race meetings, but you're seldom colder, oddly enough, even in biting wind and rain, and even in driving snow and hail, as we've had recently, than in an overly air-conditioned press room or indeed broadcast booth. COTA. You could hang meat in the COTA press room, and the COTA press room is enormous. You can park a B52 in there and still move around it. It's massive, but it is always ridiculously cold in there. Something about American air conditioning. But the tale, have we not told it, of the 24 Hours of Dubai some years ago. If you've not been to or seen the Dubai Autodrome, it's effectively in a desert on the outskirts of Dubai. And the Dubai 24 Hours, oddly enough, takes place over 24 hours. And that means that at some points it gets dark. And when it gets dark in a desert, it gets very cold indeed. Even though, joining the chorus, it's a desert. The defining thing about most air conditioning systems, automatic air conditioning systems, is they operate either by keeping a room at a particular temperature or by keeping a room at a certain level below the ambient external temperature. What that means, of course, if the external ambient temperature is a desert, you're going to be comfortable during the hours of daylight. It also means that when it goes cold outside, it's going to be freezing inside. And yes, indeed, the Radio Show Limited crew, from memory, it was myself, it was John Hindhoff, it was Paul Truswell, and I think another, I'm trying to remember who else was in there, were literally freezing overnight, holding my laptop across my arms to try and get some warmth in, until we got into the wee small hours and the sun began to poke its head over the Burj Al Arab. And yes, at about 6:30, Steve, you're absolutely right, there was a polite knock at the broadcast booth door, and in came a almost apologetic Thomas Enger with 6 cups of Starbucks coffee, asking whether or not we might quite like a cup of coffee. To this day, I still maintain Thomas Enger saved my life. That was how cold I was.
Next one, we've got Joseph Kang on Facebook. He says, considering many OEMs are selling SUVs and CUVs in greater numbers compared to their sedans, coupes, touring and GT cars, could you foresee a time in the near future where we might get a racing series based on mid-size SUVs?
Well, haven't we got that with the I-Pace trophy?
Yeah, I guess we have. Yeah.
I guess we have. We have seen SUVs out in competition. Principally, we've had a couple of Lexus SUVs at the Nürburgring 24 Hours. More recently, there's a small SUV that's sold in Europe, Toyota. A crossover in Europe. But I sort of hope not, on the basis that they're really nice things to drive across Europe or a continent. We're not doing that at the moment. We're in the Fun Bus, which is a very ordinary Ford S-Max, by the way. If you're from Marshall Pruett's side of the pond, you have to look that up on the internet, but it's a lovely thing. But I hope not, because for me, I think they're all pretty ugly. Sorry, don't want ugly race cars. It would be quite hilarious in certain instances, but maybe
with the right driver set.
Well, maybe actually what we need to do is to persuade the people behind the Stadium Trucks series to actually take it to the next level, get sponsorship from all these companies that make the SUVs and crossovers, and have have them with the SUV bodies. So maybe we could get a kind of a Cadillac Escalade and a Nissan Qashqai, leaping over jumps around, the Gold Coast where they're going nuts with Robbie Gordon and the guys. But we don't get that. There's sort of inevitability that we're going to. Who's going to be the first person to put one in touring cars, do you think? It's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, at some point.
It's going to happen.
Last two questions.
Wow.
We've got now, and they're both from Right Turn Lover. The first one is...
That's not like Right Turn Lover sending in questions.
I know.
He said, again with his tongue firmly in his cheek.
And it involves Joe Bradley, so it's going to be good.
It involves Joe Bradley and Right Turn Lover.
So
that's not a mental image I ever want to have again in a hurry.
So, Joe Bradley is infamous for inspecting fluids lost by race cars and tasting them when he does his pit lane reporting.
He does.
In your media career, have you done similar or similarly interesting detective work?
Similarly interesting detective work. I bow to the massive media powers of Joe Bradley. Joe is hands down one of my favourite people in the media. He is a very bad man indeed. He's known as the naughty uncle of the sports car paddock. He asks some of the very best questions. If you've not seen the question he asked to Fernando Alonso at Daytona, I urge you to find that on the internet because it was hilarious. Have I tasted fluids? I have actually done it once or twice. It's the slight problem with that is I've absolutely no idea what brake fluid tastes like, so it's sort of pointless. But detective work.
I've got two things that immediately came to mind that you've done.
Go on.
Okay? One is the newer generation of LMP2s.
Right.
The amount of work you did behind the scenes when we were at Paul Ricard.
Yes, massive
and the other one is Brembo brakes.
Brembo brake. Well done, sir. Yeah, well, that one. Not quite Joe's level of hands-on analysis, but it was...
You didn't taste the brakes, did you?
Didn't taste the brakes, but it did take a little bit of chasing down to find out whether that was one team not doing a very good job or whether or not there was genuinely a problem, and it emerged there very much was a problem. And that one team we weren't sure whether or not they were going to do a good job was Manor, because Manor suffered 4 massive failures of brake discs in very short order, doing a massive amount of damage, 6 figures worth of damage, and not a small 6-figure sum of damage either. And yet it was one of those moments, I say not quite the same thing, but I hear where you're coming from, that you've just got to take a view to whether or not you want to actually put a story into play from a valued supplier in the motorsport industry, to say, sorry guys, but you're not doing a good enough job here, and this is putting people at risk. And ultimately that proved to be the correct story. Changes were made, and God bless them for the ACO. They may take a caning from time to time, but the ACO and the WEC did put a change in place immediately to mean that they could change the homologated supplier of that component. And what I believe, do I think lives are saved? No. I think those cars are remarkably safe. Do I think a huge amount of potential damage was saved? Yes. For those that don't know what that was about, it was a change in the way in which the particular brake discs were being sourced. It was changed from a plant in Europe to a plant in Asia, and something had clearly gone wrong in terms of the quality of that particular product. It's not a crack at the company concerned. In fact, the company that replaced that company's products on the homologated list is actually part of the same group. So it's not a crack at them. Something went badly wrong. It needed to be sorted. I'm perfectly happy to have been, one of those at the vanguard of making that happen.
When we write those sort of stories, Graham, do you love it? Are you terrified? Or a bit of both?
You've got to be sure you're right, and you've got to be sure that you're not being led down the garden path. And look, I come from 2 worlds, a world in PR and a world in journalism, where, let's face it, people not telling you the entire truth is a kind of, it's a daily hazard, really. It is a kind of, it's something that you've got to learn to anticipate, and when you're around. Perfectly have to say, there are lots of character failings, I'm quite happy to forgiving people, but being lied to is not one of them. You will not lie to me twice. If you lie to me and I find you out, and in particular if you lie to me and it then proves to be embarrassing moving forward, be sure you're not going to be trusted the next time. And I know of people out there that think they're cleverer than they actually are, and be assured, guys, that you're the guys that we talk about in the background and say you're never going to believe the load of old bullshit he's tried on me this time. I am proud when we make a difference like that, and I'm proud because it helps to sustain part of the sport that we love. And there's lots of examples of that kind of journalism still being out there and still being prevalent, and that's particularly brave of those journalists. And I'm not saying that in my regard, because I've done some work with the sanctioning body in any case to explain what we're doing and why, because we live in a litigious world now, and it's easy to send a legal paper, it's easy to make a threat, it's less easy to acknowledge faults, and that, I'm afraid, is a failing of where we currently stand in terms of the balance between right, wrong, doing the right thing by customers and doing the right thing by your own corporate body.
Last question. Right Turn Lover says, the Indy 500 qualifying reminded me how much I miss qualifying where cars can fail to qualify. Can we spice up the Le Mans 24 hours?
That's the question, by the way.
Yes, there was. And there's going to be more. Can we spice up the Le Mans 24 hours with a GT Pro qualifying session with the slowest manufacturer sent packing?
I think not. Not in the current... I'll give you a slight difference on that. I do think the space, you recall that we dallied with the prospect of potentially having GT Pro sprint races or a GTO Pro only race. Sadly, I think we're getting away from the point where that's sustainable. I do recall a conversation with my beloved ex-colleague, business partner, and my founding editor at Daily Sports Car, where in the point at which ALMS was at one of those points in its pomp with the fantastic Porsche versus Acura battle of LMP2 and a great factory-backed and, for that matter, sort of privateer efforts in what's now known as GTLM, that the prospect there of the potential for a kind of a sprint race, one driver sprint race with a big purse, with just an LMP2 only race or just a GT only race, run what you brung type of effort with those cars. And of course that's exciting. I sort of know what you mean. The days of pre-qualifying at Le Mans predates my days of covering that race, so it's not a process that I'm familiar with on the ground. I'm certainly familiar with following up on reports of it, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to see what the reaction would be from some of the teams now, perhaps from the ELMS, to say, tell you what, the last 5 places on the grid will be defined by either your time at a pre-qualifying or test day, or indeed a short race. My guess is there'd be a very much mixed bag of opinion on that. The thought that you would do that with a factory team doesn't even begin to occur to me. I think those days are gone. The risks are just too much in terms of their willingness and ability to sustain that level of disappointment. That, so very many people in sports car racing build their season around those big blue ribbon events, and particularly in Europe, Le Mans, and in no small part, of course, in IMSA, the big blue ribbon events that IMSA now hold as well. I think it would be a tough one to take, particularly if you retain a situation where a world championship, by definition, means that one of those rounds you're entitled to take part in every round, that being the Le Mans 24 hours. Less certain that there might not be a case for something if the health of the European Le Mans Series, and increasingly looking, by the way, like increasing health of the Asian Le Mans Series, presents you with the incredibly difficult decisions that the ACO clearly had this year. Might there be a prospect there or something? Well, that's one maybe to mull over for the kind of questions we'd like to be asking ourselves as things move forward. We're not a million miles away. We're about Lille, aren't we? So about Lille. So number one, thanks first of all to Stephen Kilbey for stepping in for this unique, I hope, edition of the Week in Sports Cars aboard the DSC Fun Bus on our way back from the Spark-Francorchamps, livening up no end what is, I think you'll agree, Stephen, the dullest journey in motorsports, that being the journey to or from Eurotunnel to Spa, 3 hours of unbridled tedium, but thanks to Stephen for helping us to host this one through and for doning up the questions. Thanks as well, of course, as always, to Cooper Tyres and the Justice Brothers for their invaluable support for the Week in Sports Cars and all the rest of the Marshall Pruett podcast. And once again, I'm sure all of you listening in will join with me in saying, get well soon, Mrs. Pruett. And Marshall, look after the lady. That's more important, even than the Week in Sports Cars. For now, and until next week, good night from us.